Football podcast as part of the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm your host and I'm your friend Jeff Greer. I'm so excited to be back with a new episode. We have a great guest on today. It's Paul Rogers, the voice of the Cardinals, the play-by-play broadcaster who does Louisville football and Louisville men's basketball and has done it for going on 3 decades as the permanent guy, but he's been around Louisville basketball for 5 decades. 5 decades. Now, one thing that always impressed me about Louisville basketball is that's not that many coaches, actually. So he's only been around a couple of coaches in their programs, but he's been around the basketball team for a really long time. And above all else, just a super nice guy, really thoughtful, very smart guy. Love talking to him whenever I get the chance to. And I loved this interview with him today. We did record it, as I mentioned, in the broadcast, or in the interview, I should say, before the Louisville-Wake Forest game. So we're thinking of Louisville as the 8-1 Louisville before the result on Wednesday night in Winston-Salem. A couple of house cleaning items before we get to that conversation. Of course, first and foremost, make sure that you have subscribed to this podcast if you haven't already. That way it automatically downloads to your podcasting app, whatever phone you have, whatever platform you get your podcasts on. The episodes will go directly to it if you subscribe to Floyd Street's Finest. That also helps us pick up other listeners and people who might be interested in our work at the Field of 68. It allows us to do cool things. Bring on more people, bring on more podcasts. And I would recommend a bunch of other ones. We've got a Kentucky podcast, an Indiana podcast, if Louisville fans want to hate listen to other team podcasts. I'm half kidding. As well as a bunch of ACC related, team-related podcasts as well. And then the other thing I would just say is we do have a YouTube channel. So go on to YouTube. Don't get sucked down a rabbit hole, but just go onto YouTube and get in on the Field of 68 rabbit hole. That's probably the best place to end up being in that, in that spot. But subscribe to the Field of 68 Media Network on YouTube as well. And one last thing, make sure you rate and review the podcasts here. I did also want to mention on a personal note that I have started up a Louisville basketball newsletter. I want it to kind of work off of the podcast and vice versa. This podcast is part of the Field of 68 Media Network. The newsletter is my own thing on Substack, but I'm going to make sure to talk a lot about the podcast in my newsletter and mention the guests and direct you guys back to this there. But also, if you're interested, I am starting a subscription-based Louisville basketball newsletter that will run for the foreseeable future. So we'll be writing in-depth stuff about Louisville hoops that hopefully you've come to expect from me over the last 7 years or so. Without any more hesitation or any other house cleaning items to say, let's get right into my conversation with Paul Rogers, who not only gives us a little insight into how he gets ready for broadcasts, what his process has been like for developing a relationship with the color analyst for many years, Bob Valvano, who has a great afternoon radio show on ESPN 680 here in town. But we also talk about the current team, and he makes a point that I agree with, and that is Louisville is probably not going to be a great three-point shooting team this season, but they seem to have figured out a really good way to have a nice mix of inside out. They don't rely as much on the three as they did in the past 2 seasons. I do think that also is helped by having 2 ball-handling guards in David Johnson and Carlik Jones, who are much more adept at getting into the lane and beating people off the dribble and running pick and roll than some of the previous guards in the program. Now, that's not a knock on the previous guards. It's just a different style of play. And as a result, Louisville's offense is looking efficient. It could get better. They need to cut down on turnovers. And defensively, because of their length, because of their athleticism across the board with their roster, even without having a 6'11", 7-foot center and Malik Williams healthy and playing and directing the defense from the block and from the lane, they have the length and the type of style of defense that can really thrive, or at least the style in terms of personnel, I should say, that can really thrive under Chris Mack's defensive philosophy. So I was wondering about Louisville in terms of how legitimate they were. And that's not to disparage the first 7 wins of the season. I think the Seton Hall win right now looks like the best non-conference win and probably will remain that way. I think Western Kentucky and Kentucky have had some bumps in the road, Kentucky way more so. If Kentucky, this is after the Alabama loss, but if Kentucky can get to double-digit wins in the SEC, their net rating, you would think, would presumably rise, which would help Louisville. And then Western Kentucky is 2-2 in Conference USA, which is sort of surprising, but I would still peg them as the favorite to win that league, even though it's proving obviously to be difficult. So right now, Louisville has one really solid non-conference win and a couple others that could play out to be nice ones. And I bring all of that up to say that I needed to see Louisville beat someone other than, with all due respect to my humble alma mater, Pittsburgh, other than Pitt and Boston College. Even though those games were away from home and solid wins, I wanted to see them go up against another team that has designs on an NCAA tournament bid in the ACC and really a top 5 or 6 finish in Virginia Tech, and they beat them. They struggled a little bit down the stretch. They let them back into the game. I think the defense is designed in a way that you want teams to shoot jump shots, and also if a team gets hot shooting jump shots, they can get back into a game against Louisville, and that's what happened. Virginia Tech found its offensive rhythm late, hit some jump shots, and really made things uncomfortable for Louisville in the final few minutes of that one. But still, nevertheless, a big win for Louisville. And setting up, they've got 2 games before this, but I'm really intrigued to see them against Florida State and Duke, a Monday-Saturday split. I don't know how good either of those teams truly are, but it's a big opportunity if you're Louisville to notch wins that I think will really catch people's attention even more so and put them in a great position to be a top 4 team in the ACC. So with all that being said, let's talk with Paul Rogers here on Floyd Street's Finest. And please be sure to rate and review your new favorite podcast and let me know what you think. Okay, we are joined now by Paul Rogers, the longtime voice of Louisville Cardinals basketball and football, and a guy who I've always enjoyed being around in the scrums before games or at press conferences and all of those things. Paul, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. I mean, as well as we can all be doing in these wild and crazy times, but I'm at home, hunkered down for the most part, and I'm not getting out a lot except when I have to go to a ball game.
Well, I've been always such a big fan of your calls, and this will not surprise you just because of the work that I previously did. There were only so many times where I ended up having to listen to the game on the radio versus being there. But I always opted for what this will hopefully make you happy. I always opted for the radio call with the TV on silent. So kudos to you for that. Yeah, absolutely.
We like people who do that. It takes some dedication. It doesn't normally match up. Now we often tell people, you can, if you're listening on a mobile device where we are delayed quite a bit, you can pause your TV and back it up to where we are, and then the two are in sync. So those people who like to go to that trouble, I salute you and we appreciate you.
Well, I guess we'll start with this. I think so many people in Louisville, and I have totally come across this a lot over the last 7 years. They always talk about you and the work that you have done, and obviously your familiarity now with the program going on, as we talked about before I hit record, 5 decades now, right? Is that so? 70s, 80s, yeah. 90s, and into the last 2. That's so. Were you from Louisville? I can't remember if you grew up here. Okay.
I did grow up in Louisville. To be honest with you, I grew up more of a Kentucky fan. Both my parents went to Kentucky, and I went to Kentucky. But I was a Louisville fan too. It was the Kentucky was the school of my state. Louisville was the school of my city, and I followed UL over the years. unlike many Kentucky people, never had any great animosity toward them. And so, as careers go, it turned out I've done Louisville games all these years. But yeah, which is great to me because, I mean, certainly you do research and you study upon games, but in the historical perspective, I've seen a lot of Louisville sports over the years, and don't always have to go necessarily to the record books. I have a lot of memories and understanding of what has transpired here over the years.
Well, I was going to say, I think something that is it's probably just something people don't think about, but the preparation that broadcasters put in before the game to have that ability to cite things just from memory, because especially with basketball, you don't have that 40-second time period between plays like you do in football. You're like, I mean, you're going right with the moment. Can you take us through what your prep process is like for Louisville games?
It's primarily on the opponent because obviously you follow Louisville day in and day out. So most of the prep is on the opponent, but you do have to obviously update statistics in your game notes, whether it's Louisville or the other team before each and every game. So most of it is learning the opponent. And once you get into conference play, even that is fairly easy because you know a lot about the teams to start with. But it's basically fine tuning as you get right down to that game. What have they done this year? What are they doing now? Are they on a hot streak? Updating all your stats. And I almost always, well, I always try to at least watch the opponent's previous game just to get an idea of where they stand now and who's getting the playing times and those kinds of things. And it's, people always ask me, how much time do you spend preparing? And I honestly don't know the answer because it's kind of an ongoing thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading the paper in the morning and going in the internet and scanning things here and there, watching videos while I'm on a treadmill. So it's sort of an ongoing process. So by the time the game gets here, you feel like as about as much as you can know.
I think the fact that the team broadcasters are with the team, it's got to give you that extra layer of familiarity with just the mannerisms of players, especially coaches, because you obviously get to talk to them a lot more. That was something that I always noticed the few times that I went behind the scenes for stories, is being around the assistants, the graduate assistants, and just kind of getting a better feel for them. How much do you think that has become a helpful thing for you in doing these games?
It's a lot. As I was told right from the beginning, there's no substitute for being there, which is why this year has been so challenging because we're not there. We have limited access. We had no access to football practice. I have been allowed to go to some basketball practices, but at a distance. I mean, I'm there, but I can't really sit down and talk to the players, talk to the coaches. All those things are done virtually. So you've really lost that personal contact that you have where you really do get to know the team. Don't travel with them like we used to do. And it's you're right. It's more, it's not that you are totally in the know, but you're just around them and can observe things and get a good idea of the personality of the team, the mood of the team, and all those kinds of things, which have been lost this year with the pandemic, with your lack of access.
Now, I got to get into a couple of different things. I have so many questions for you, but the first, before we get into Louisville specific basketball memories, I'm always so curious, how did you and Bob Valvano form your relationship of on-air connectivity? Because obviously Bob's really good at it. You're really good at it. You guys have probably been around each other a lot over the years, but how did you sort of form that relationship that made it sound good on air?
He, after he quit coaching at Bellarmine, in fact, he might have even still been the coach at Bellarmine. I can't remember for sure. He started doing a radio show at WHAS, which is where I also worked at the time. And I just admired his sense of humor, his glibness, his knowledge of everything. Yeah. If not knowledge, certainly curiosity about everything. And I can't remember exactly how this came about, but when Rick Pitino replaced Denny Crum, Jock Sutherland had said at the time, because he'd been kind of considering, how long he would stay around. He said, when Denny Crum leaves, I think it'll be time for me to leave too. So he did. And at that time, I'd kind of gotten to know Bob. I knew his basketball background, and we just touched base. And I said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing color on the games?" And he said, "Sure." And the decision ultimately comes down to kind of a combination of who U of L wants to have, who the station wants to have, and so forth. And so that's how it started. And then as it went on, we just, it grew and grew. The bond there was really neat with between Bob and me. My grandson just walked into the room.
That's okay.
Being as quiet as he can.
That's okay.
He picked up something off the printer.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, so as someone who, and you mentioned your first season doing any form of broadcasting was back in 1973, 74. And then in the 90s, you picked up full-time the football and men's basketball. Do you have a favorite call? I mean, you've obviously, gosh, the amount of players who you would have been able to call games of them playing, the coaches who have been on the sidelines, the big games, of course, that Louisville would have been involved in over all those years. But is there one or maybe two, if it's hard to pick one, that have stuck out to you as your favorite call?
That's an interesting question. I frequently get asked about my favorite game or favorite memory, but as for a favorite call, I actually do have one, and it would be rather obscure because I can't exactly even remember what the game was and who the running back was. I want to say it was a run Bilal Powell made, but it was a long touchdown run. And the reason I like it so much, it was just one of those things one of those plays where things from a descriptive standpoint fell into place. I caught a blitz coming and I said, "Oh, they picked up the blitz." He broke through the hole and I called that. I said, "He's got some running room." And I said, "He needs a block." And just then somebody came and hit the block. And then he went on and he ran it for like an 80-yard touchdown. And later when I heard that, I thought, wow, I kind of described everything just as it happened and just as it unfolded in a timely, untongue-tied manner. And just one that kind of resonated me with, wow, that's a good one. That's the way you should call a play, and the way you strive to call a play every time. It doesn't always work out.
Yeah. Well, I listened to, there's a really good podcast. I don't know if you listen to the Play-by-Play podcast, and it's been recorded over a few years, but Kevin Harlan was on, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, and talking about doing the radio versus TV, but especially with radio, and this will definitely resonate with you. Your brain, you're supposed to just kind of just talk through what is happening because it's live and you're watching it. Your brain has to work so fast to be able to, and like you said, in that moment, capture what's happening quickly, describe it in a very condensed way and concise way, but descriptive, and get you through the play so that your analyst can then talk once the whistle is blown.
Yeah, that's the fine line. You want to be descriptive. You want them to know, is he in the open field? Is there a man with a chance to tackle him? Did he cut to the right? Did he slow down? Did he speed up? All those things, you kind of want to paint that picture, which if you're watching on TV, the viewer can see, and you don't have to say all those things. And so you want to be descriptive without stumbling all over yourself trying to say too much, and get it all in there. So that's the ultimate challenge. And every game I do, I go back and listen to, and I'll find calls. How could I have said that better? How can I paint this picture better? And that's not just me. We all do that. I think we're all pretty self-critical and analytical, and always want to see if we can do it just a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, so for basketball, you have, if the math is right, you have called what, 3 Final Fours?
I've done 3 personally, okay. 05, 12, and 13. Yeah.
Okay. How different is it once you get to the tournament and you're, among 1,000 seemingly radio and TV folks all along the row on the side of the court versus usually the home and the away broadcasting crew, and maybe if it's a really big game, the ESPN radio crew will come in and do a game or something like that. But how different is that environment versus what the normal game is like?
It's funny you ask, because I can remember in the '05 Final Four, which obviously was my first one. I mean, it's like everything else. The buildup is there, the excitement is there, the tension is there. It's the big stage, and you know it. Well, once the game starts, you're doing what you always do. And I remember, I think it was the first TV timeout. I turned to Bob and I said, "This is cool, but it's just we're just doing another game." And I mean, we knew it wasn't, and not that the excitement wasn't there, but when it comes down, it's like a player will tell you. Once they toss the ball up, you got to defend, you got to shoot, you got to pass, you got to do all the things you do in every game and every practice you've ever done. So there's sort of a routine that kicks in that I think is good, but yet you're aware it's a very special moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so what do you think about how much has the team calling the games with Mack, who wants to play a much slower tempo than Pitino and even Crum? Like how different is that for you in terms of being able to think things through, or is it not that different in terms of pace and tempo and all that?
It's really not that different. I mean, we all like fast-paced games for sure, just because of the flow and the excitement. But when it comes to calling a game, I mean, you're describing as best you can every movement that's going on out there. So whether it's happening in the half court or happening on a fast break, you're still saying as many words, describing as many things. The pace of the game may change, but I think the pace of your talk or conversation and concentration is pretty much the same no matter what's going on the floor.
So how do you view your job with the coaches shows? And I know you've had a chance to do them with Pitino, obviously with David Padgett for one season, and Chris Mack. I'm sure you feel like you've got to get some good questions in there, especially when gosh, we both know how much stuff has come up over the years with Louisville that has been prescient. But also, I mean, you do have to maintain that relationship with the coaches because you're the play-by-play guy. Like, how have you dealt with that over the years and thought about that part of the job?
It is something you have to balance. And fortunately, all the coaches I've worked with have been pretty understanding of my role. And when it's the Chris Mack show, it's not the Paul Rogers show. Mm-hmm. So when they come on, I'm not going to be morally safe for 60 minutes trying to grill them. That's not my job. But I think there are, probably dated myself by saying morally safer. I shouldn't. Right. But there are issues that need to be addressed, and I think they're aware of that. But also, I like to use that hour as sort of an opportunity to get a little broader with things. For example, just this week on the show I did with Coach Mack, I mean, since we're not doing it in a restaurant, especially now, it's just him and me. He's in his house, I'm in my house, and it's become, in my view, kind of a fireside chat. Mm-hmm. And we talk about things other than just how's your man-to-man defense, how's the pack line defense. I was asked him, for example, did he discuss with his team what happened at the Capitol recently? Mm-hmm. And we talked quite a bit, without trying to overdo it, about the hurdles they having to constantly jump through, hoops jump through, hurdles to jump over with the COVID restrictions, mm-hmm. how they do the practices, how they do their game meals and so forth. So it's just an opportunity, I think, to talk about more than just the nuts and bolts of basketball. But I'm not going to sit here and ask him, what does he think of the NCAA's impending ruling? Because he's been asked that a million times. There's nothing new that's going to come of that. And I just don't think that's the time you need to go over those things that pretty much there's no firm answer to right now.
Mm. Well, and that's where like you said earlier, sort of the continuous game prep comes into play, because you'll have seen his quotes in the newspaper or heard them on a radio show or in a press conference or whatever it is. So if you've heard it, most Louisville fans probably would have seen it at some point. That makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about the current team, and you've had, as I've said, I mean, you've seen so many Louisville teams over the years. What do you make of this team at 8-1? When we're recording this, they're playing Wake Forest later today. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I would assume they would be 9-1 after tonight. But so far this season, what has your impression been of this group?
To be honest, they've kind of exceeded my expectations, the Wisconsin game notwithstanding. And by the way, I don't know if you saw Wisconsin get their brains beat out last night by Michigan. Yeah. So crazy things happen. Other than that game, I think the key questions coming into this year were, with all the players they were losing, Jordan War, Ryan McMahon, Dwayne Sutton, go down the line, who would step up and come through this year? Then they lost Malik Williams. Then they lost Charles Minlund. And now you're really throwing your hands up saying, what the heck's going to happen? Well, what's happened is Quinn Slazinski has stepped up really big time. Sam Williamson, a little bit inconsistent, but still has played better. I think the freshmen have been outstanding, what we've seen from Davis and from Withers and from Trainer. So guys who have needed to step up and perform and put in quality minutes have done so. Even a guy like Gabe Wisnitzer. So I think this team as a whole has done what Chris Mack has asked them to do, and to be 8-1 and 3-0 in the ACC, which they had never done before, and 2 of those on the road. Now you don't have hostile road crowds, but still there's a difference in going home and away. I think what this team has done is really good. And looking at the ACC as a whole, without any real dominant power out there, Duke, Carolina, Florida State, everybody looks vulnerable, even Virginia. I think Louisville right now is as good as anybody in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wanted to see the Virginia Tech game. I wanted to see, again, another team that has exceeded expectations a little bit, has good players, and really seems to be playing well with for Mike Young. A little bit further behind in where Louisville is with Chris Mack in terms of implementing a different style of play, but that was a game that I really needed to see, I think, to have an idea of, okay, Louisville is actually really good, or increasingly so as we look at the teams they have beaten. Louisville has beaten some teams that you would think ultimately they should beat, and maybe things are going to be a little more difficult in the ACC. What would you peg as?
I'll point out Virginia Tech didn't beat Duke last night too.
I know, yeah. So that's increased their. Yeah, that has really helped. That's really helped them. Seton Hall has ended up being a pretty good team as we sort of expected. I still think Western Kentucky and Kentucky have the opportunity to make Louisville look better than they currently do, but Western's a little surprising at 2-2 in their league. What would you peg as sort of the strengths for this team, do you think, and maybe some areas where you'd like to see them get a little bit better over the next 2 months?
I would like to see them be a little bit better three-point shooting team, but I don't realistically think that's going to happen. They'll have some games, everybody does, where they go out and make 10 or 12 threes, but that's not something you can count on from this team. But I'd like to see them get a little bit better in their three-point shooting. But I think their strength is really knowing who they are. I think they understand they've got to rebound. They're one of the best rebounding teams in the conference. Their overall defense has been very good. Players knowing the roles. I think those have been the strengths of this team, is guys understanding what needs to be done and what needs to be done individually and collectively, and how well they've done that.
Mm-hmm. Last two things I'll ask you. One is, how do you, again, I have to stress this for people watching this. I assume they know, but you just never know. Few people who are not in the program as coaches or players will have been around the coaching staff as much as you have. You and Kenny Klein really are the two guys and Bob Valvano. How, from your perspective, from watching him the last 2.5 years now, how has Chris Mack's personality translated to the program and the way things are run? Because college basketball, so much more so than NBA or any other level, it's so much to do with the coach and their philosophy and their personalities. So how have you seen his personality show through with this program over the last couple of years?
I would say just the tough-mindedness of these guys, understanding what's expected of them, and playing. I don't like the term with a chip on their shoulder necessarily, but playing with an earnestness and an intensity, and understanding what Coach Mack wants and doing it in a controlled manner. I think maybe the best way to summarize that is the way the Pitino defense was and the Mack defense is. As we all know, when Rick was here, it was all about deflections. That's not a stat I think this staff even keeps. And it's not that they don't want you, knocking a ball away when you can, but they would rather you be positioned than to take yourself out of position going for a steal. So it's just sort of that solid, tough-mindedness, one-on-one. I'm against you. You can't beat me defensively. I'm going to block you out. I'm going to do what needs to be done. It's just kind of a different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, last thing then, I gotta ask you this. So we have both, I'm sure, experienced many fun travel nightmares or experiences over the years. I think my favorite was the time I went down and sat with you and Bob for a few minutes at Georgia Tech after the snowstorm, and you guys had eventually needed UPS's plane hangar and stairs from Delta or somewhere, and they were just all trying desperately to get you guys to Atlanta for that game in the middle of a snowstorm. But do you have an all-time favorite travel, either nightmare or just a funny story that you would tell someone at like a Christmas party or something like that?
That would be it, because traveling charter eliminates a lot of the problems that you would normally have flying commercial. You don't have, I won't say you don't have canceled flights, but because they do get sometimes delayed and rearranged, but basically you don't have to deal with a lot of the variables you do with commercial flight. But that one you mentioned, it was funny in so many different ways. First off, we had tried to go the night before and could not because of weather in Atlanta. So we were on the plane and there was and we could have taken off, but they said we could take off, but I don't know if we would ever land. So they sent us all back home, and it was, I believe it was a noon game on Saturday. Mm-hmm. So they sent us all back home and said, be at the airport at, I think it was 8:00 or something like that in the morning, and we're going to try and get in there. Well, they'd had an ice storm in Atlanta, and the airport was not fully opened, but we could fly in there. So we did. But when we got there, everything was so frozen up, they couldn't get a ramp to the plane. Because with charters, you normally disembark onto the tarmac. You don't go through the jetway and into the terminal. Mm-hmm. So as you said, Kenny Klein, who knows everybody in the world, somehow got hold of somebody at at UPS, because we'd landed in the Delta wing, and they got a stairway over to us, but it didn't fit the plane. So when we got off the plane, we were here, and the ramp was here. So you had to take a big step up to get onto the ramp. So anyway, we get down. Then it's the fastest I've ever gotten from the airport to downtown Atlanta, because there was no traffic, because everything had been shut down. The roads had just gotten clear enough. So we zipped to the hotel. Bob jumped out and did, normally I would do a pregame interview with Rick, but at that time I had to get the arena set up. So Bob got out at the hotel, recorded a pregame interview with Rick while I got a ride to the arena and got there in time to get set up. Then the team came over. I'm not even sure why they went to the hotel, maybe just changed clothes because they obviously couldn't stay overnight. So we got to the arena, got set up, played, and turned around and came back home. So breakfast at home, dinner at home, and a quick trip to Atlanta in between with a lot of, and fortunately Louisville won the game, of course, which helped as well. So that was the most bizarre trip that we've had in terms of changing things on the fly and having a quick and successful ending.
I think everyone that was in McCamish sitting there like, are they going to be here? Like, are they going to show up?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the players running down the stairs of the arena. It felt like a high school basketball game where they arrived on the bus and they just ran right onto the court and wiped their sneakers off. Yeah, it was incredible. What a weird experience.
Just a quick funny PS to that. When Rick and Bob were doing the interview, the team hotel was, I want to say the Ritz, or it was a very nice hotel in downtown Atlanta. And Bob says to Coach Pitino, well, have you ever checked into a hotel for just 2 hours? And Rick says, not one this nice.
Oh, no. That's very much a Rick Pitino line. That's very much so. I like to tell people about seeing him in Belgrade, Serbia, of all places, coaching Panathinaikos last winter. And it was hilarious watching him do a press conference because everything had to be translated. So he would be sitting there like making jokes in English, and maybe like 5 people in a room of 50 would get it. And then the guy sitting next to him would say it in Serbian, and then everyone would start laughing. So he was enjoying himself a little bit too much, I think.
I hope they understood his sense of humor. Sometimes that can get lost in translation too.
Definitely. It definitely can, especially in that part of the world. Well, Paul Rogers, you are much appreciated in Louisville. You do a great job. You're above all else a really nice guy and very thoughtful guy. So I appreciate your time as always. And thank you for joining us here on Floyd Street's Finest.
My pleasure. Enjoy the visit, Jeff. See you later.
All right. Thanks, Paul.